My name is Sarah. 10 years ago, my husband threw a suitcase at me and said I was too poor for his big dreams. Today, I am 38 years old, standing inside my own successful restaurant. Through the wet glass door, I see him shivering, soaked to the bone, and begging for a simple bowl of soup. My hands grip the counter as my chest tightens, remembering the scars he left behind. I never thought the man who destroyed my life would come back as a broken shadow in the dark, desperate for a miracle. He looked at me with hollow eyes, thinking I would save him again. But this time, I didn't. 10 years ago, a dream that broke a family. My world was small and quiet. I lived with Mark in a tiny apartment where the walls were thin and the floor creaked under our feet. Every night I cooked for him, watching the steam rise from my grandmother's soup recipe. It made the room feel safe. Mark used to hold my hand and say, "I will make us rich, Sarah. We will live in a palace one day." But his eyes began to change. He grew tired of our simple life and started to complain about the smell of poverty in our clothes. He looked at our old wooden table with disgust. I didn't know he was already meeting Elena, a woman with an empire of gold. He was secretly planning to trade my loyalty for her wealth. He stopped smiling at me and our little son. The end came on a freezing evening. I prepared a special dinner, but Mark didn't bring home flowers. He placed a cold white envelope on the table, divorce papers. I felt a sharp pain in my chest as if the air had left the room. I searched his face for a single tear, but his hands were perfectly steady as he pushed the pen toward me. His expensive new watch ticked loudly in the silence. Tick, tick, tick. He looked at me like I was a piece of trash that no longer had value. Without a word, he took his suitcase and walked out into the night. That was the last warm meal I ever cooked for him, the signature that sold his soul. Mark married Elena very quickly. I heard about their wedding from old friends. It was a world of gold and diamonds. But Elena was a woman of business, not a woman of heart. Before the wedding, she placed a thick document on his lap. Her smile was as sharp as a knife. "If you truly love me, you will sign this," she said. It was a prenuptial agreement. Mark wanted the life of a billionaire so much he didn't even look at the small print. He laughed and signed his name with an expensive gold pen. Thinking he had finally won, he didn't realize he had just signed away his freedom. For the next few years, Mark's life looked like a beautiful dream. He was the CEO of a big company that Elena owned. He drove a red sports car that shined in the sun. He wore suits that cost more than my old apartment. He walked into luxury rooms with his head held high, enjoying the attention. "I thought I won," he told his friends at fancy parties. He felt like a king sitting on a throne. He completely erased our past from his mind. He believed the gold would never stop shining. However, Elena was much smarter than Mark. One evening, she poured him a glass of dark red wine and moved closer. "Trust me, honey," she whispered. She asked him to sign bank documents for loans worth millions of dollars. Mark felt his chest tighten with a small bit of fear. He looked at the giant numbers on the paper, but Elena just stroked his arm and smiled coldly. He wanted her to be proud of him, so he signed every single page. He felt like a powerful architect building an empire. In reality, he was becoming the only person responsible for every dollar of debt. Mark felt strong, but he was just a shield for Elena's risks. 2 lives, 2 directions. Far away from his mansion, I was building my own world. I didn't have a gold pen. I had a small wooden cart and my grandmother's recipe. Every morning at 4 a.m., I was in my tiny kitchen. The smell of onions and spices filled the air as I worked until my back ached and my hands were sore. But when I went home, I saw my son's bright eyes. My son smiled, and that was enough. I told myself every night I was exhausted, but I was the owner of my life. People began to wait in long lines to taste my soup. My small cart was becoming a famous restaurant. As my shop became popular, Mark's world began to shake. The real estate market started to crash. Elena became very quiet. She stayed late at the office and stopped drinking wine with him. Mark didn't know that the bank was checking every paper he had signed. Dark clouds were gathering over his kingdom. He was still smiling for the cameras, but his hands were secretly shaking under the table. He thought he was climbing a mountain of gold. He didn't realize he was standing on a bomb and Elena was holding the remote. The bomb finally exploded. As I heard later, one rainy morning, The loud, rhythmic pounding of the police at his door woke him up. Mark's world turned upside down as officers handed him legal papers for millions of dollars in debt. His hands began to shake uncontrollably, the white paper trembling like a leaf in a storm. He ran to find Elena, his breath coming in ragged gasps, his heart hammering against his ribs. He still believed she was his savior. He found Elena in the kitchen looking perfectly polished. She wasn't crying. She didn't even flinch. She was casually sipping expensive champagne and watching the rain wash over the windows. "Elena, help me. The police are here," Mark screamed. Elena slowly turned around, her eyes as cold as winter stone. Instead of a hug, she placed a packed suitcase and a pile of documents on the marble table. "I am safe, Mark," she said, her voice flat and hollow. "My lawyers made sure of that. You signed the loans. You are the only one responsible for the debt." Mark felt a sharp pain in his stomach, as if he had been punched. His vision blurred and he had to grip the counter to keep from falling into the dark hole opening beneath him. Elena handed him one last paper, a divorce petition. "You are a bad investment now, Mark," she said. Her tone is dry as bone. "I already hired a new CEO. He is younger and he doesn't sign stupid papers. I don't need a loser in my house. Leave immediately." Mark stood in the absolute silence of that huge house. He looked at the predator he had married. He had traded a life of love for a golden trap. Now the trap was closed, and there was no one left to hear his cries, the taste of what he lost. I later learned that Mark had nothing left. He had walked for hours in the cold rain, his dirty suit and broken shoes a reminder of his failure. Money was a cruel master. Elena had used him until he was empty, then tossed him into the dark like a piece of trash. He felt like a ghost, a shadow in the night, watching a world he no longer belonged to. That was when he saw the warm light of my restaurant. The sign said Sarah's Legacy, but he was too exhausted to notice. He pushed the heavy glass door and stepped into the warmth. I saw him from the shadows of the kitchen. He sat in a far corner, his shoulders hunched, and ordered the cheapest soup we had. He just wanted to feel warm for 1 minute. When the bowl arrived, I watched him pick up the spoon with trembling hands. Clink, clink. The metal hit the porcelain. He took a sip and suddenly froze. His eyes went wide and his body turned to stone. One drop of his salty tear fell into the bowl. The soup was hot, but Mark's heart felt like ice. It was the same recipe, the same smell of onions, and love that he had once called the smell of poverty. He whispered to himself, "It's her. This is the taste of the love I threw away." He finally understood that he had traded a diamond for a piece of glass. He put his head down on the wooden table, his shoulders shaking uncontrollably in the quiet room. He felt the heavy weight of 10 years of selfish mistakes. He sat there, a broken man, eating the love he had betrayed, not knowing that I was already walking toward his table. I pushed open the kitchen door and stepped into the dining area. I wasn't the tired, broken woman he had thrown away 10 years ago. I wore an elegant, tailored dress, and I moved with the confidence of someone who had built an empire from nothing. I looked around at the happy faces in my restaurant and smiled. Suddenly my eyes met his. Mark stared at me, his face turning pale as a ghost, his mouth opened, but only a dry gasp came out. I saw his gaze drop to my polished shoes, and then to his own dirty, torn ones. He finally saw the diamond he had traded for a piece of glass. Mark's shoulders hunched as a deep, biting shame took over. He was a beggar in the house I had created with my own sweat and tears. He tried to push himself up from the table, his fingers white from gripping the wood, but his energy was gone. His legs felt like lead, and he collapsed back into the chair. He looked down at his lap, unable to find the words or the courage to speak. I didn't scream or throw him out. I simply stood there, breathing quietly, my heart as calm as a lake. I looked at him, but I didn't see the man I once loved. I saw a stranger who had lost his soul. He had abandoned a life of truth to serve a predator like Elena, and now he was paying the price. I walked slowly toward his table, and I knew his heart was pounding in fear of what I would say next. Regret, closure, and the final lesson. Mark stared up at me, his fingers trembling against the edge of the cold table. He stuttered, "Sarah, I am so sorry. I was so wrong. I was blind." I saw the desperation in his eyes, searching for a spark of the woman he used to know. He was waiting for me to scream at him. He wanted me to be angry because anger means you still care. Any emotion would have been a gift compared to my heavy silence. But I stood perfectly still. I didn't feel sad. I looked at him the way I would look at a stranger on the street. My heart didn't ache because I had healed myself a long time ago. I took a slow, deep breath. The air in the restaurant was warm, but I could see Mark was freezing. I spoke in a very quiet, steady voice. "I am not angry with you, Mark," I said. A tiny spark of hope lit up his eyes, but I extinguished it immediately. "I am just finished. I don't feel anything for you anymore, not even hate." Mark's shoulders slumped, a cold emptiness filling his chest. He realized that being forgotten was much more painful than being hated. I looked at the half-finished bowl of soup and gave him a polite business smile. I looked down at my watch and tapped the glass. "The soup is on the house, Mark. I have a meeting to attend, so please finish your meal." I didn't wait for him to respond. I didn't ask about Elena or his bankruptcy. I simply turned my back on him and walked toward my office. Mark sat there in the quiet, his heart dying inside. He was just a ghost in my beautiful new world. I had already moved on. A man with warm, honest eyes walked into the dining room. His snorts reached out and placed his hand softly on my shoulder, and I felt a deep sense of peace that I had built myself. I looked up at him and smiled, not a fake smile for a camera, but a real one. At that moment, my son ran out from the kitchen, his voice full of life. "Mom, are you ready to go?" I squeezed his arm and nodded, my heart full. From his dark corner, Mark watched us. I could see him flinch as our son laughed. The son he had abandoned for a life of luxury. He sat there, his breath catching in his throat, realizing that all of Elena's gold was freezing compared to the warmth in this room. I didn't look back at him. I didn't say goodbye, and I didn't offer any more pity. I simply took my husband's hand, and we walked toward the door together. The bells chimed softly as we stepped out. Behind us, Mark sat alone in the silence. The soup in his bowl was now cold and grey, just like the life he had chosen. He stared at the empty space I had left behind, finally understanding that some doors stay closed forever. Outside, the rain had stopped. I felt the warmth of the sun on my face as I stepped into my future. I didn't look back once. My path was finally clear. As I feel the warmth of my son's hand in mine, I finally understand the truth. Don't trade a diamond for a piece of glass. Money can buy a fancy house, but it can never buy a home. It can never buy the beautiful soul of a person who loved you when you had nothing. True wealth is not found in a bank account. It is found in the arms that hold you when the world is cold. Maybe you have never lost everything like Mark, but there may have been a moment when you felt tempted by an easy shortcut, a fast promise, a deal that sounded too good to refuse. Sometimes it is not greed that leads you astray. It is pride. The quiet voice that says, "I deserve more. I am smarter than the risk." When you look back, you may notice how small decisions slowly shaped your path. A paper you signed too quickly, a warning you chose not to hear. And maybe, like Sarah, you have learned something else. Pain does not have to destroy you. It can teach you what you will never accept again. Would you forgive a man like Mark, or would you walk away forever? Comment, forgive, or walk away. If this story made you feel something, please tap the like button. And if you want more English stories about life, love, and quiet justice, subscribe to Classical English Stories. Thank you for staying until the end.